WWE and TNA signed multi-year deal to continue partnership. To a fan of a certain vintage, that headline might as well read, "Hell has frozen over." Granted, NXT sending people to Impact isn't as dramatic as other hell frozen over moments, like the returns to WWE of Bret Hart, CM Punk and others, but it's still pretty bizarre to see those two logos next to each other in 2025. WWE and TNA have a long and complicated history together. Mostly negative, usually just passive-aggressive though, with TNA often being the little dog biting at WWE's ankles. In this video, we're going to look at one of the most passive-aggressive things one wrestling company has ever done to another. It's become known as Cookiegate. We're going to look at what that is and who exactly was involved. 2004 is an interesting year for TNA, in that a lot of big changes were made in the still very young company. In this year, they ditched their weekly pay-per-view format and moved to monthly pay-per-views, starting with Victory Road in November 2004, along with their first major television show, Impact. Victory Road was built around a hyped-up main event where Jeff Hardy would challenge Jeff Jarrett for the NWA World title in a ladder match. While Jeff Hardy was nearing the title at the top of the ladder, he would be turned on by Scott Hall and the debuting Kevin Nash, who would form an Elvis-inspired faction with Jeff Jarrett, known as the Kings of Wrestling. I'm sure you don't need telling this, but I'm not an American, and even I know that Hall, who was born in Maryland, nor Michigan-born Kevin Nash, are the most southern of wrestlers, making the Elvis stuff come across a bit weird. The Kings would lay waste to TNA's most popular babyfaces, AJ Styles and 3 Live Crew, more on them in a bit, before a foot is shown getting out of a limo backstage. That foot is shown to belong to the Macho Man Randy Savage. All of this is to say that at the next TNA pay-per-view, Randy would wrestle what ended up being his last ever match, by which I mean he would show up at the end of a 6-man tag team match, as part of the odd-sounding team of he, AJ Styles and Jeff Hardy, to defeat the Kings of Wrestling. Sorry, wrestling. Though you might think that the in-ring return of Randy Savage, who hadn't wrestled a match for a major wrestling promotion since WCW in 2000, may have been enough of a draw, TNA was still looking for other ways to get some extra buys. By the way, this isn't important, but in case you were wondering, Randy's final match on pay-per-view to this point had been 5 years earlier at WCW Road Wild, where he defeated, of all people, Dennis Rodman. In the summer of 2004, TNA began taping Impact at Universal Studios in Orlando, Florida. Sometime after TNA had begun its residency in Orlando, WWE sent half of their roster to a lot at Universal Studios to film a commercial for their upcoming Royal Rumble. This would be the 2005 Rumble advert, the one that resembled West Side Story if you were on hallucinogens. A lot of top-level talent was brought in to film the advert, with one person quoted in the Wrestling Observer estimating that the shoot cost anywhere up to $500,000. They noted that traditionally, wrestling pay-per-view commercials had only really existed to push the date of their shows, but how dare they try to insert a little creativity? These could possibly have served as a trial run of sorts for the 2005 series of WrestleMania commercials that were all parodies of well-known scenes in movies, from Forrest Gump to Pulp Fiction to Gladiator and a few more. The best one of course being the When Harry Met Sally one, but you didn't hear that from me, okay? When TNA learned that WWE would be literally in their backyard, they rolled out the welcome wagon, kind of. Members of the TNA roster, Shane Douglas, Tracy Brooks, Abyss, BG James, Conan and Ron Killings, all approached WWE's production. WWE, behaving like the adults in the situation, quickly instructed their talent to leave and have nothing to do with the TNA stars, and so TNA didn't get a ton of footage. They coined the term Cookiegate themselves, implying that they had some kind of scandalous footage that made WWE in some way look bad. To be very clear, they didn't. Or at least they didn't air anything that made WWE look bad. 2 hours and 18 minutes into the pay-per-view broadcast, after the Randy Savage tag match and before the actual main event, A 6 sides of steel match for the NWA Tag Team titles. Mike Tenay and Don West throw to TNA's Director of Authority, Dusty Rhodes, who demands that the production truck plays Cookiegate. The first thing we see is Shane Douglas introducing the segment, along with Tracy carrying cookies and Abyss holding balloons. I'll say it here so I don't have to mention it again. There are several references to Tracy bringing cookies and muffins. It was 2004. Shane says that they're there to welcome WWE because, quote, they're here to check out what a professional wrestling program looks like. They cut to footage showing BG James and R-Truth, along with a ton of blurring, presumably to hide the WWE wrestlers' faces. Then we see the TNA crew interacting with this wrestler, who at first I thought could be Eddie Guerrero, but his outfit doesn't match what he was wearing in the advert, so maybe Luther Reigns. No relation, obviously. We hear BG James a lot here, mostly jabbering about wanting some of their catering. He tells one person, Vince might remember me, I made a lot of money for him. We then see this bloke, who quite clearly seems to be Rey Mysterio. BG James then tells us with glee that Ron Killings stole their Mahi Mahi. We then get a group shot of all of the TNA crew, including Conan, who doesn't at all look shifty. He enters the shot carrying a 2x4 with a towel taped to it, which it took me a sec to realise meant that he was waving the white flag. They made a few inside jokes about the idea that Vince might be there, and BG and Killings once again reiterate that they stole some food. And we then cut back to Mike Tenay and Don West. God bless Mike and Don, but they did their absolute damnedest to push the question of how WWE could have threatened to sue them, but not even they could have saved this. Because what they were calling generous hospitality was actually a bunch of wrestlers taking the piss. Mike even asks if this is anything like DX driving a little Jeep up to WCW's back doors. My wording, not his. It's not the same, because that was at least funny. I mentioned earlier that this aired near the end of the pay-per-view, which you might think would be to build suspense and intrigue. No. It was to preface it with a bunch of daft sketches throughout the night. In an attempt to get over how WWE didn't want the footage to air, a fake Triple H and Vince McMahon wandered around the Impact Zone like bumbling idiots, trying to find the tape. These aired throughout the night and varied in quality, but I'll be honest here and say that I laughed out loud once when the bloke playing Triple H says he was looking for the tape, but he found the gym. I
was looking for the tape and I found the gym.
The Vince character, who they only refer to as Mac Daddy, gets assaulted by a little person and leaves in an ambulance. The internet tells me that these two were played by Bobby Roode and Petey Williams, wearing the trunks of Hector Garza, apparently because he owned a pair of trunks that had a H on them. The Wrestling Observer claims, though, that the Vince character was played by a ring announcer called Tim Welch. All of this was supposed to make WWE look bad, but many fans just thought TNA looked a little sad for airing it, and promoting it beforehand as some sort of expose. In his review of the show, Dave Meltzer in the Wrestling Observer described the Cookiegate footage as innocuous and almost useless. He noted that WWE wrestlers' faces were blurred, confirming that one of them was Luther Reigns. He also noted that Rey Mysterio and Conan in particular had been close ever since they trained together in the 80s, which is likely why Rey stuck around longer than most. Luckily, Rey was one half of the SmackDown Tag Team Champions at the time, and he continued to win his matches after this, so clearly wasn't punished for his part in hanging around. While TNA claimed that they came in peace, they certainly picked an interesting set of wrestlers to send over. While a couple of them had no link with WWE at all, most had access to grind with their former employers. Let's start with Tracy Brooks, who at the time would have been TNA's longest tenured female performer, which is a polite way of saying that her and Trinity were TNA's entire women's division for a fair while. While she worked for many companies in her in-ring career, she's most associated with TNA, so you could argue that she's fairly innocent in all this. Speaking in an interview with High Spots not long after Cookiegate, Tracy gave her account of what happened. We were shooting kind of like a Desperate Housewives thing, and we had cookies and I was all dressed up. Whether Vince was pissed off or not, I have no clue, but he shouldn't because you never sell a rib. But it got exposure for us, it got us buy rates for the next pay-per-view, and it was funny, and people talked about it, so I was glad to be part of it. On the surface, what Tracy said here seems fairly innocuous, but it does show that she doesn't exactly seem bothered if WWE doesn't call after this. She would remain with TNA until 2012, and in 2023 was inducted into the Impact Hall of Fame. The other fairly innocent party is the monster Abyss. Looking back, it's hard to remember a time when Abyss wasn't known for insane bumps. While he actually competed on the very first TNA event, using the name Justice, he would begin his run as Abyss in June 2003, and so had only played the character for nearly a year and a half. As noted, this was long before Abyss was known primarily for hardcore matches, and an obsession with landing on drawing pins, or thumbtacks in American. Being a big, intimidating looking masked wrestler, he was often compared to Mankind and Kane back then. In 2019, Chris Parks would join WWE as a producer, and would briefly appear on SmackDown in the pandemic era as AJ Styles' statistician, but this was as close as he ever got to being a WWE wrestler. Well, sort of. There was a rumour back in 2007 that he might have been WWE bound, possibly even to face off with The Undertaker at WrestleMania 23, which would have been a lot better than that Mark Henry match the year before. On a 2015 episode of Jim Ross's Ross Report podcast, Abyss said that John Laurinaitis offered him a contract and a main event position. He said Tommy Dreamer had helped him get contact, as he worked in the WWE office at the time. Abyss then said that he turned the offer down at the last minute out of loyalty to TNA. When asked about creative plans by JR, Abyss said that he was due to debut at the 2007 Royal Rumble, and start a story with The Undertaker that would have led them to WrestleMania. Undertaker would win that year's Royal Rumble match, and then go on to beat Batista for the world title at WrestleMania 23, so I think he did alright. At the end of 2006, Abyss also won the NWA world title from Sting, perhaps for his loyalty if you believe his side of things. BG James, perhaps better known as the Road Dogg, might be the most controversial choice for TNA to have sent. Having left WWE in early 2001 due to issues in his personal life, Road Dogg might have been the unluckiest wrestler of all time. Speaking on the WWE Network's Monday Night War series in 2014, he told the story of attending the final WCW Nitro in the hope of getting a job there, only to be the last person in all of wrestling to discover that WWE had bought the company, and there was no chance of a job anytime soon. Road Dogg, using the name BG James, would be an early hire for TNA, and would stay until late 2009. James and Billy Gunn have admitted before that during this time in their careers, they were loose cannons, to put it lightly, and they said many things that they later regretted. They also talked a fair bit of smack about WWE on television, renaming their team the Voodoo Kin Mafia, VKM. And they would repeatedly challenge Shawn Michaels and Triple H to a fight at, quote, The Alamo, which obviously never happened. On a September 2023 episode of his podcast titled Oh You Didn't Know, Road Dogg noted that the soundstage that TNA shot in was literally right next door to the soundstage that WWE was recording in. I can't move past BG James in this video without getting to the mahi-mahi he was so insistent on drawing attention to. In his podcast, Road Dogg explains that the reason for this was because WWE's catering was so far above what TNA provided them, making their own sound like something out of the Fire Festival. In TNA at the time, we got a boxed lunch, and it was literally like a sandwich, an apple, and a thing of chips. Ron Killings, better known to WWE fans as R-Truth, was another fairly recent former employee. Killings had been a tag team partner of the Road Dogg, using the name K-Quick before his release. He hung around a little longer, before he too was released in late 2001. As far as why he was released, in the February 11, 2002 Wrestling Observer, Dave Meltzer reported that Killings had given a recent interview where he stated that he was given no reason for his firing, and that when he inquired, nobody got back to him. You could see why he might have had a chip on his shoulder then. Conan and Shane Douglas also have history with WWE prior to Cookiegate, and both were there around the same time in the early 90s. Conan was only in the company briefly, and was slated to bring life to the Max Moon character, Conan actually created the character himself, even playing the role in WWE a couple of times before being replaced by Paul Diamond. According to Conan himself though, it seems that not moving to WWE was his own choice. Speaking in an interview, he said that I was blowing up in Mexico. I was doing a soap opera and a rap record, and I was tired of lugging boxers over to WWE. And I was like, I'm a star here, what do I need this for? Shane Douglas, having been a dynamic dude in WCW, and the franchise in ECW, would become Dean Douglas in WWE. As I'm sure you can imagine, he wasn't entirely thrilled with that. But then, Shane Douglas doesn't seem the type that's much thrilled by anything at all. His role in Cookiegate just seems to be chief shit-stirrer, as he's often seen grinning throughout the footage. Mind you, with a list of enemies as long as Shane Douglas has, that's hardly surprising. There is one person left to mention, and that's the man behind the camera for TNA, David Sahadi. Having previously worked for WWE, he knew a lot of the talent who were at the shoot, and was the one who first discovered that WWE was going to be there. During his time working for them, he made a memorable video package that aired before WrestleMania 14, featuring legends like Classy Freddie Blassie and the Big Cat Ernie Ladd. The video was so emotional in its tone that upon viewing it, Vince McMahon wept, which is dangerous really, because it could have caused him to rust. Sahadi had left WWE in 2003, joining TNA in the following year, and the noticeable improvements in TNA's production quality in the early years of Impact are often attributed to him. Unfortunately for Sahadi, according to the man himself speaking to Conrad Thompson in 2024, his role in Cookiegate may have resulted in some personal loss. David's father had been a long-time employee of WWE, and he alleges that his father was punished for his role in Cookiegate. My dad was given a Legends contract by Vince McMahon Jr. because he worked with Vince Sr. He did a lot of stuff with Mike Tyson during the Attitude Era with Lawrence Taylor, so he was getting a $3,000 check every single month. He then goes on to explain how WWE took that monthly check away, and he alleges that it was because Kevin Dunn wanted to get back at Sahadi for his work with TNA. I found out there was a meeting in Kevin's office with some people who I won't mention, and they said, how do we get back at Sahadi for him trying to screw us? Again, I wasn't going to screw them, I was just trying to get PR for TNA. So those are the wrestlers involved, but did you know that none of them were the original choice? Dave Meltzer mentioned in the November 22, 2004 Observer, TNA set up an idea of a reprise of DX invading WCW, as they were going to have Hall and Nash invade the WWE Royal Rumble tapings. He then adds that Hall and Nash declined to be part of it, possibly because they were only signed to limited dates, and this would have counted as one, but also because they likely didn't want to burn any bridges with WWE. Clever really. In a funny and quite self-aware manner, on Road Dogg's podcast, when his co-host informs him that Scott Hall and Kevin Nash were the original picks, Road Dogg's reaction is, well, that would have been a lot better. So that was TNA's attempt at getting some PR out of WWE coming to their backyard. A not too serious attempt at invading the competition. Before the footage had even aired, Dave noted in The Observer that the guys who came out, like Jericho, Guerrero, Benoit, Mysterio, etc., were guys that everyone in wrestling likes, and they ended up just talking. Orton and Heidenreich came out and they were nice to all the TNA guys, so the idea of some big confrontation fell apart. The only exception seemed to be John Gaburick, who fans saw in Tough Enough, who told the TNA crew that they would be sued if anything was done with the footage. It seems though that the worst WWE actually did was file a complaint with Universal Studios. Despite this and a legal letter that was sent to them, TNA clearly wanted to make more of an issue out of this. On the November 16th tapings, Mike Tenay announced that fans could vote on the website whether they want to see the footage or not. Bob Carter has given the company the go-ahead to air the footage, even with the WWE threats. And of course fans will vote to see it, and of course it will air against WWE's wishes. This led to an interesting reaction, as beforehand, Cookiegate was made to sound like a much bigger deal than it ended up being. and TNA's wrestlers ended up looking nothing like DX did at CNN Center. Back when DX did their invasion of WCW, it would have ended very differently had the WCW wrestlers warmly greeted Triple H and crew, and they didn't even bring cookies. Thank you for watching yet another wrestling channel. If you enjoyed this, please comment, like or subscribe.